This is from a quote from Deb Dana's book, Anchored. Safety is to be in love with life and strong enough to risk connection. And Stephen Porges, who she works with very closely, also talks about healing is when we're safe enough to be feeling trusting and connected in someone else's arms. So, healing, a lot of it is our own personal connection. We need to come back into connection with ourselves. And then, of course, we're highly affected by other people, no matter whether we have a lot of other people in our physical life or not as many, but we're certainly all affected by each other. So that's part of the work as well. But here's the It Sounds True, Befriending Your Nervous System, and Anchored, Deb's new book. And the quote, polyvagal theory is the science of feeling safe enough to fall in love with life and take the risks of living. And I know from my own experience, and I'm sure everybody knows this from their experience, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we go into a fight, flight, or freeze response, and we might stay in predominantly in those responses for years or decades. I certainly was in a freeze response a lot of my life, thought I was calm and centered. In fact, I was kind of dull and not very responsive. And so it's really helpful as we're going through this to learn more about how this all works. So this is the ventral and sympathetic and dorsal. It's the autonomic ladder. This is one of the ways that Deb explains or outlines how the nervous system works. I think everyone here is pretty familiar with this. So ventral vagal is when we're feeling safe and confident and trusting and like things are going to be okay. We feel connected with ourselves. We feel like it's okay to be connected with other people. One of the points that sometimes people kind of miss is that it's okay to move up and down the ladder. We do that all the time. Our nervous systems are activated by something. We go into a fight or flight response. If it's something more serious, we go into a dorsal vagal response, a freeze. That can be a physical kind of a freeze where we hold our breath. It can be more of an emotional freeze where we just kind of get really kind of hunkered down and almost in a fetal position. So we're not really engaging. Our eyes are down. We're not engaging with our environment or with the people around us. So the idea of learning more about this is that once we start to see it when we're starting to go into these states, then we also have tools we can bring ourselves back. The sooner we see it, the sooner we can intervene and the sooner we can work with that. One, to understand how it works, and then two, to use that information to create this life of well-being. So we don't want to always be in fight, flight, or freeze. Most of the time, we want to be in a state of connection and safety and trust and confidence, and where we can engage with the world, we can engage with ourselves and with each other. So neuroception, this perception of our safety or threat, and our whole autonomic nervous system works in the background. And as we listen, and people that have been doing this work for a while, we get very skilled at seeing the subtle signs. Oh, I'm noticing that I'm holding my breath. And then we automatically take some deeper breaths. It's like setting a Google alert in our system for signs that our nervous system is doing something, and then we can work with that. So some of the language, this is Deb's language, biology and magic. Our biology creates the platform, and our autonomic state sets the landscape for our stories. That's something we'll explore a little bit more as the weeks go on as well. And oftentimes when I'm talking about meditation or when we're going to meditation, I'll refer to we relax the physical body, we work with the breath and get the breath flowing smoothly, and then we start to work with a little bit of distance from the thought stream. Because if we're carried away by the primitive brain generating thoughts of anxiety or fear, or if we're feeling something like that in our body, we really don't have the capacity to go into meditation. But it's also true that we don't have the capacity to really live fully in the moment, in our present moment in our life. This is what we're referring to there. If we can regulate our emotional and our nervous system, then we can have that capacity get stronger and stronger. So we learn to be with our experiences instead of hijacked by them. We learn to not take them so seriously in a certain sense. It doesn't mean necessarily what we think it means. So if we have an experience of of hypervigilance or being hijacked in our body, we have an experience of going into fight, flight, or freeze. As we know more about it and we have more experience with it, then we just come back into this, oh, I can see that I'm being activated by something. What's going on? So, this is just basically convincing us that there's a lot of good things that happen when we work with our nervous system. Now, this is something we're going to come back to again and again. Survival states activate self criticism. And I kind of knew that, but when I was reading about that in her book, I'm like, that is so true. So, when we go into a fight, flight, or freeze, we turn against ourselves. When we're in ventral vagal, when we're in that state of connection and trust, we have the capacity for self compassion. So, what Deb's saying is self compassion is an emergent property of ventral vagal, which means we're only able to access self compassion when we're in a state of connection with ourselves and when we're able to be kind of steady, emotionally regulated. So, as we move into a state of protection, we lose that capacity. And what happens is then the inner critic comes in. We have the core deficiency beliefs. We have that feeling like there's something really horrible about us. And we have this thing that we've been talking about for years about why is it so much more difficult to have compassion for ourselves than someone else? And that's linked in with this too. So, coming back to ventral vagal, the state of connection and regulation, that gives us the opportunity to access self compassion. And when we cultivate self compassion, so the practices we do to cultivate self compassion also bring us back into ventral vagal. So it works as a cycle in both ways, which I thought was really interesting and a really powerful way to work with this. So, another cue, in addition to, okay, I'm holding my breath or my shoulders are up around my ears, another cue that we've gone out of a state of regulation could be that we're starting to have the inner critic. When we start to hear those critical thoughts or the catastrophic thinking, those kinds of things, that would be another clue that we're in fight, flight, or freeze. And then we could work with that. So let's pause here and we're going to do some practice. So, this listening to our body is really listening to what's the nervous system doing. And when we are able to have that capacity of a witness or an observer, and we do this all the time with our thoughts, we witness our thoughts, we witness what's going on in our body, then that's another way of saying we're bringing awareness to what's happening in our system. And we're doing this with a sense of curiosity. So the first stage here is not to wonder about what it means, because then we're up in our thought stream. We're trying to figure out something that's in our unconscious, our body, our nervous system. We're trying to apply our cognitive mind to it. And that's not really, they don't really match that way. So let's just do however you want to do it. If you want to have your camera off or settle in, we're going to take a few minutes for each of these. So from the outside in, where am I? So if you locate yourself in space and time, so it's Sunday, it's community class, you could look around the room and look around, not on your Zoom screen, but just looking around your room. Is there anyone here with you? We look for cues of safety all the time when we do this. We look to see if there's anything dangerous behind us, to the sides. What are we doing? And what state has been activated? So when we're looking at what state has been activated, we would use those clues like my body's pretty relaxed right now. My breath is pretty continuous, it's pretty deep. I feel when I look around at the other faces and names on the Zoom screen, I can see that there's nobody here that's going to hurt me. My experience with this group is that I'm okay here, if that's your experience. And so we just kind of locate ourselves. And we can use these practices if we're feeling like we're holding our breath. We could stop holding our breath and get that more continuous, smooth breath going. We could hold our own hands. We could do the butterfly hug where we kind of link our thumbs and then just kind of pat side to side over our heart, chest. Follow those practices where we get grounded in our body. So let's take a moment here. What are you noticing right now? And how specifically are you noticing it? Is it visual? Is it your breath? What are your eyes bringing in? And sometimes we notice we're not very comfortable the way we're sitting, so you could relax your body. And then from the inside, what are you sensing in your body? So sometimes the cue for this will be notice the space your body is occupying and what's happening in that space. So, where is the energy moving? Do you feel like you're really in touch or connected with your body? Do you feel like it's kind of a blank, numb? What's going on in your body right now? Sometimes we'll have a fist in our belly or some kind of other sensations. Let's just notice that for a moment. So, in this stage, we're really not trying to figure it out. We're really just looking to see what's happening on the inside of my body and physical as well as energy. So, are my shoulders up around my ears? Is that a common feeling? Are your arms and legs kind of restless? And also looking to see, is there a fight or flight, which is more active? It's a sympathetic arousal. And then dorsal is the collapse or freeze. So those feel very different. And the associated thoughts, we'll get into that a little bit more later too. But sometimes when we're tuning into the nervous system, something will happen. And maybe it's, something we see on Facebook and then we notice, oh, okay, I'm holding my breath. And maybe something that we read triggered a memory of something. So one of the things we might look at around thoughts is there a specific event or maybe an age? When I tune in and I notice my body, I can feel like this feels like my 12-year-old or this feels like my 5-year-old. So sometimes we have a sense of age. And sometimes it's not really connected with a specific memory, it's more of an emotional flashback. So again, we're not really looking to figure it out. We're just kind of noticing, is there something like that there? If there may or may not be. And what state, if I had to say right now, I'm in a little bit more in fight, flight, or freeze, which one of those would it be? And you might even bring up a little memory of something over the last few days and look to see what was going on in your environment. Was there somebody in the room? What was going on? And what were the feeling on the inside? Were you breathing? Was there energy there? What did it feel like to have that state activated? And so now let's really go into a memory. And it might be something you were just thinking about or something else. And don't pick a 10 out of 10 kind of distress memory. We're just looking as a practice. So maybe it's something that, over the holidays, since somebody said something that felt kind of shaming, or you felt left out, or whatever it might be. It could be something recent, could be something a while ago. And so as you're bringing that to mind, use your visual, auditory, or other senses, maybe sense of smell, You might bring to mind the details of it. Well, I was at this location, these people were there. What was going on? And notice if you were more in a fight response. So sometimes when, if we use an example of somebody saying something kind of mean to us or where we felt left out, we might go into a fight response and want to say something back. We might just kind of really disengage and leave the room or turn to our phone or something. So just notice what was going on. Or did you get into kind of more of a freeze where you kind of tuned out or disconnected? And notice that right now, you're not experiencing that moment. And notice if you have at least one foot in ventral vagal in that state of I'm regulated, I'm noticing my breath. And I'm also thinking about something that was kind of activating. So we kind of go back and forth, we're looking and saying, oh yeah, I can see just thinking about that or bringing it to mind, I can feel a bit, at least a bit of activation. And did you go more into fight or flight or freeze? And one of the things that in a moment, we're going to go into small groups. One of the things about doing something we're not sure is going to happen, how it's going to happen. Are we going to be in a state of fight, flight, or freeze? Are we going to enjoy it? Are we going to feel good about it? Is that anything that's unfamiliar, our brain automatically says, I'm not sure about this. And so it interprets it as a bit more dangerous than something that we're really familiar with. So we can learn to experience, okay, this is not familiar to me, or I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn out, as interesting instead of threatening. So that's another thing that's really helpful to know about the nervous system. Sometimes when we're looking at going into a situation, we're pretty sure that it's not going to be any good. We're pretty sure that in that particular group of people, we're going to feel left out, or maybe somebody's going to say something that's nasty, or sometimes we're pretty sure, but oftentimes we're not. We're not sure. And that unfamiliarity can feel just as threatening. And anyone who has any social anxiety knows all about that. Okay. So we're going to do this in a minute, but let's pause here. Bring to mind a time when you've said no. And maybe you could even bring to mind one of each of those. So from that fight or flight, it's like, nope, you can't make me, I'm out of here. From that not caring of when we're in a freeze, that dorsal collapse, it doesn't matter what I do, I don't matter. And then from that ventral regulated place of setting a boundary, I have a choice, I matter, I deserve to decide. So I'm going to just be quiet for a couple of minutes. So bring to mind each of those. What does it feel like in your body right now as you're kind of looking at those different ways that we have of saying no? And from dorsal, we might say no to going out for a walk with a friend. We just don't have the energy to do that. And notice your body, notice your breath, notice the felt sense of that. from not caring, from setting a boundary. So when we're really regulated, what does that feel like when we set a boundary? And then switching over to the maybe. So I can't make a decision about this. So is that fueled by fear or anxiety, not being able to make a decision? A little bit of time here so you can bring up an example and notice what that feels like in your body as well. And when you're feeling in that dorsal collapse, it's impossible to decide. That's a little different than that mobilized energy of fear or anxiety. Well, what if I do this and this turns out? And that's more of the catastrophic thinking. And when we're feeling steady, we might not know what to do, but there's that sense of possibilities. We have some good options. We're not sure which one we want to do. And really notice what it feels like in your body as you're bringing up memories of those different experiences. So, that feeling of hopeless, impossible to process or think what to do is very different from the mobilized energy of fight or flight. And it's also very different from I'm feeling strong and steady and I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but it's not from that sense of catastrophe or hopelessness. It's different. There's a curiosity there. What does that feel like in your body? And then let that come to a close. Take a few breaths and saying yes. So when someone demands a yes and we feel like we have to comply, thinking about and feeling into that, we've probably all had that experience with a boss or a parent or a bully. So take a little bit of time with each one of these from a place of despair. We just say yes because it doesn't matter. So those are the two kind of negative sides of this when someone's demanding it and we have to comply, or when we're frozen and we just don't really have the energy to care. And then to come into the felt sense of saying yes when we're regulated. We have a choice, we're willing to engage, we're interested in moving forward. And Deb uses the phrase, I'm ready to see what's possible. What words might you use? But also, what does that feel like in your body? And can you bring to mind some things that you say yes to in this kind of enthusiastic, open, curious, engaged way. What does that feel like? And when we feel into that in our body, we could notice what happened to your breath. Are you kind of slumped over like you might have been from despair? Are you sitting up a little straighter? Your shoulders relaxed? What's happening in your body and your breath? I'm ready to see what's possible. All right.